Good evening, everyone. Hello, 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 and welcome to another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I am your host, Nelson E. Brown, and I'm so excited to be with you all tonight. I'm so excited that you took time out of your busy schedule to tune into the show this evening. This is our last show for Black History Month as we celebrate Black History Month in 2022. We are going to have Mr. James Hill with us this evening from 6:30 to 7 p.m. to talk about his work as not only an author, but also as a book publisher. So this is the last show for Black History Month as we celebrate it here on the Beauty in Us Radio, right here on Awesome God Radio. So Mr. James Hill, he is the CEO and founder of RockHill Publishing LLC, and he's based out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. And he's going to be speaking with us this evening about how to go about the book publishing process, not just as an author, but as a book publisher in general. He's going to speak with us about what it means to be a Black publisher and what it means to be a Black author in today's world, and what it means to navigate through the book publishing industry and how to get your feet planted as you continue to tell your story and as you continue to just invest your time, your energy, and sometimes even your money. I'll say all the time, even your money into this book publishing business and into this industry. So he's going to speak to us about that this evening. A lot of people have asked me, as a self-published author, how do I write? And how do I go about writing my first book? What kind of ideas should I jot down? What kind of ideas should I outline in my first book? A lot of people have trouble writing their first book. A lot of people get something that's called writer's block, where an author has a very, very difficult time figuring out what to write about and how to jot down new ideas for a new book. So a lot of people have messaged me, and a lot of people have asked me, could I help them start, jotting ideas for their first book? A lot of people have asked me, what should I write about? Because people know that I'm a self-published author and a radio personality. They ask me, what kind of content should I create? What kind of book should I write about? What kind of ideas should I jot down? And I really don't have an answer to all of that, because a lot of times, again, this is annoying. The glare on my glasses is annoying. But like I said, a lot of people have a very, very difficult time writing their first book, and people always ask me for ideas, but I really can't give them a concrete answer in terms of what they can write about or what they should write about. In terms of creating content for your first book, it's really all up to you. You have to figure out what your tools and what your resources are in order to be successful, not just as an author, but also as you invest your time, your money, and your energy into this business. And because again, this is about entertainment. This is about telling your story, and this is about being authentic and creative and passionate about your work. So this is something that everyone really has to take seriously. Traditional book publishing, according to sources, traditional book publishing is when a publisher offers the author a contract and in turn prints, publishes, and sells your book through booksellers and other retailers. The publisher essentially buys the right to publish your book and pays you royalties from the sales. So that's the traditional method of book publishing. But as a self-published author, I write and I publish my own work, and I get a percentage of royalties. I earn a percentage of money, a substantial amount of money for each book that is sold and each book that is published by me. So as a self-published author, I publish my own books, whereas through a traditional publisher, an author signs a contract with them in exchange for some type of agreement, and some type of contract. But before I dive too deeply into this discussion, I wanted to give you all my last two trivia questions for Black History Month as we celebrate it here on the show. So I'm going to read some information to you guys, and I'll announce the answer at the end of the show. You guys don't get any prizes or anything. This is just for fun. This is just to get you guys thinking. I know everybody's going to look it up if they don't know it. But again, this is a trivia question. These are two trivia questions that I want you all to think about as we go throughout the show. So again, both of these Black figures are one man and one woman, and these should be the easiest questions ever for you guys. So if you guys don't get these, it's going to be really, really sad. But this gentleman, he was born February 1st, 1901, and he passed away on May 22nd, 1967. He was an American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist from Joplin, Missouri. He was one of the earliest innovators of the literary art form called jazz poetry, and he is best known as a leader of the Harlem Renaissance. He famously wrote about the period that the Negro was in vogue, which was later paraphrased as when Harlem was in vogue. Hey, that rhymes. Growing up in a series of Midwestern towns, he became a prolific writer at an early age, and he moved to New York City as a young man, where he made his career. And he graduated from high school in Cleveland, Ohio, and soon began his studies at Columbia University in New York City. Even though he dropped out, he gained notice from New York publishers. The first one was The Crisis magazine, and then from book publishers, and became known in the creative community in Harlem. He eventually graduated from Lincoln University, but in addition to poetry, he wrote plays and short stories, and he also published several nonfiction works. And from 1942 to 1962, as the civil rights movement was gaining traction, he wrote an in-depth weekly column in a leading Black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. So this is some information that I want to share with you all about this gentleman. Again, these are two Black figures, one Black female and one male, that I am talking about this evening as a part of my trivia question. So the second one is a Black female. Again, these should both be very, very easy for you guys, but I hope you guys have taken some time out to learn about your history if you haven't, so that you guys can feel in touch with, who you are and where you come from and what your foundation is. I've enjoyed learning about so many historical Black figures, and I've been able to identify with so many, especially as a self-published author, telling my story. And this is what the conversation is going to be about this evening as we dive deeper into the subject during the second half of the show. So the second author was an American poet, memoirist, and civil rights activist, and she published 7 autobiographies, 3 books of essays, several books of poetry, and is credited with a list of plays, movies, and television shows spanning over 50 years. She's received dozens of awards and more than 50 honorary degrees, and she is best known for her series of 7 autobiographies, which focus on her childhood and early adult experiences. The first is called I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, which was published and written in 1969, and it tells of her life growing up until the age of 17 and brought her international acclaim and recognition. And she became a poet and writer after a string of odd jobs during her young adulthood. And she was respected as a spokesperson for Black people and women, and her works have been considered a defense of Black culture, and her works are widely used in schools and universities worldwide. Although attempts have been made to ban her books from some U.S. libraries, her work is most celebrated and has been labeled as autobiographical fiction. But many critics consider them to be autobiographies, and she made a deliberate attempt to challenge the common structure of the autobiography by critiquing, changing, and expanding the genre. And her books center on themes including racism, identity, family, and travel. So again, this is a little bit of information that I wanted to share with you guys about 2 prolific authors, 2 inspirational people, 2 inspirational Black figures who are unfortunately and sadly not here with us to celebrate Black History Month with us, but they've left their mark with us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to create Black literature, but I still want to talk about what it means to be an author and what it means to be a book publisher. Now, I did some digging, and I used my personal experience to talk about this and to create the subject for this evening, but I wanted to, again, do my research and do my due diligence and figure out what makes a good book publisher, since we have one who's going to appear on the show with us this evening in about 20 minutes. So I was surfing the web and I did some research, and I simply typed in the search engine, what makes a good book publisher? And according to sources, it says that what makes a great book editor are years of experience in the writing and publishing worlds, and the willingness to set aside their ego and good communication skills. Some examples of those include honesty and directness. But just because you did well in your high school English class doesn't mean that you're a good editor. So this is just some comedy that they, I guess, decided to throw in about what it meant to be a really, really good editor and what it meant to be a really, really good publisher. So it says who does what and why in book publishing. So again, sources say that when you publish your book, your team of knowledgeable professionals will guide your project from manuscript submission to publication. But once your draft, or which is also known as your manuscript, is complete, a team will guide your project through formatting and typesetting to turn your words into a book, which is then available in 3 formats: ebook, print book, and my copy. So again, these are different formats, different ways people can read books nowadays. I know a lot of people who are a fan of electronics and who are a fan of digital stuff. They can definitely have an opportunity to read books nowadays as an ebook. So when they're on the go, or even audiobooks. Audiobooks are really, really helpful. I listen to them sometimes. In addition to reading the traditional and paperback copies of books, I also enjoy reading audiobooks. And I also, I haven't had a chance to read an ebook yet, but I do have some customers who've purchased some of my books in an ebook format. So I'm a little bit familiar about that process. But one day, probably in like 2028, when I celebrate my 10 years of being an author, I might decide a couple of years before to create an audiobook of all of the book of poetry that I write or that I have written. But we'll see what God has in store. But I'm always thinking, I'm always using that creative muscle in here. So we'll see what happens, but I digress. What exactly does a book publisher do? So again, these are some of the list of things that book publishers do. When they're reading manuscripts and when they're trying to sign contracts with new authors. So, excuse me. Long before the book, according to the sources, it says that long before the book gets to that point, the book publisher begins their work. And if you're writing nonfiction, as soon as your idea is accepted, the publisher will assign an editor to begin working with you to make sure that the book you write is as good as it can be. Now, depending on the publisher, this may extend to helping you get leads, putting you in contact with others in the field, or helping you negotiate travel arrangements. So again, this is if you're signed to an agency, a literary agency. So a book publisher will also generally pay you in advance, which can help you cover the costs of your project or help you take some time off from work to finish writing your manuscript. If you're writing fiction, you'll be assigned an editor when your manuscript is accepted, and the editor will help you shape the finished draft into something ready for publication. Now, the book publisher will also take care of all of the pre-press jobs that need to be done to ensure that your book is released in the best possible form. They will work with a graphic designer to produce a cover for the book, with a number of editors to make sure it is free from typographic errors, an editor, excuse me, to help smooth the prose itself, a layout artist to build attractive and readable pages, and many other people. And they will also have a legal department look over your book to make sure that there are no potential legal pitfalls or rights that need to be acquired. And if there are, they will help fix those problems or acquire the necessary rights. And all of this pre-press work adds up to an amazing amount of man hours. I think that's what it says. So that anyone self-publishing may find themselves swamped or else wind up with a subpar product. So people with large enough budgets may find themselves in a position to subcontract out all of these various jobs to experts, but this may be a costly affair. And of course, arguably, the most important job of the book publisher happens after the book is printed. So again, that gives you a little bit of an idea of what to expect from a book publisher. If you want to go the traditional route and look for a book publisher, look for a literary agency to sign you. So an author who is looking for a book publisher or a literary agent to sign them or to represent them, these are some of the things that they have to do in order to keep in mind of what to expect. But when we talk about this more in detail in about 15 minutes, we'll get Mr. Hill's perspective on it as the CEO and founder of RockHill Publishing LLC, which is based out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. But we can now shift gears and talk a little bit about what it means to represent the African American community as it pertains to the literature that is being produced. Now, according to sources, it says that African American literature is the body of literature produced in the US by writers of African descent, and it begins with the work of such late 18th century writers such as Phyllis Wheatley. But before the high point of slave narratives, African American literature was dominated by the autobiographical spiritual narratives. This genre, known as slave narratives in the 19th century, were accounts by people who had generally escaped from slavery about their journeys to freedom and ways they claimed their lives. The Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s was a great period of flowering in literature and the arts, and it was influenced both by the writers who came north in the Great Migration and those who were immigrants from Jamaica and other Caribbean islands. So African American writers had been recognized by the highest awards, including the Nobel Peace Prize given to Toni Morrison in 1993. And by the way, FYI, Toni Morrison is an awesome writer, very inspirational, very iconic. So if you don't know who she is, you can look her up later. But among these themes and issues explored in this literature are the role of African Americans within the larger American society and African American culture. So racism, slavery, and social equality. And African American writing was tended to incorporate oral forms such as spirituals, sermons, gospel, music, blues, or rap. So these are, again, some of the genres that they think about and some of the genres that they consider to be quote unquote Black literature or African American literature. So as African Americans' place in American society has changed over the centuries, so has the focus of African American literature. So before the American Civil War, the literature primarily consisted of memoirs by people who had escaped from slavery. The genre of slave narratives included accounts of life under slavery and the path of justice and redemption to freedom. This was an early distinction between the literature of freed slaves and the literature of free, quote unquote, Blacks born in the North. Free Blacks, quote unquote, expressed their oppression in a different narrative form, and free Blacks, quote unquote, in the North often spoke out against slavery and racial injustices by using the spiritual narrative. The spiritual addressed many of the same themes of slave narratives, but has been largely ignored in current scholarly conversations. And at the turn of the 20th century, nonfiction works by authors such as W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois, depending on how you pronounce it, and Booker T. Washington debated how to confront racism in the United States. And during the Civil Rights Movement, authors such as Richard Wright and Gwendolyn Brooks wrote about issues of racial segregation and Black nationalism. And today, African American literature has become accepted as an integral part of American literature, with books such as Roots, The Saga of an American Family by Alex Haley. And if you haven't seen the movie Roots, please, please, please watch that. The book is awesome, but the movie is also awesome. So please feel free to watch that. Very powerful. It's a historical and very, very impactful movie that everybody should learn about and watch and read about. The Color Purple, 1982. It was written and released in 1982 by Alice Walker, who won the Pulitzer Prize, and The Beloved by Toni Morrison, which achieved both best-selling and award-winning status. All of those are good books. Again, please, 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 whenever you guys get the chance, please, please, please order these books, borrow these books from the library, watch the movies. I mean, they're awesome. In broad terms, African American literature can be defined as writings by people of African descent living in the U.S. It is highly varied, but African American literature has generally focused on the role of African Americans within the large American society and what it means to be an American. And as Princeton University professor Albert J. Rabbit has said, all African American literature study speaks to the deeper meaning of African American presence in this nation. And this presence has always been a test case of the nation's claims to freedom, democracy, equality, and the inclusiveness of all. And African American literature explores the issues of freedom and equality long denied to Blacks in the United States, along with further themes such as African American culture, racism, religion, slavery, a sense of home, segregation, feminism, migration, and more. But African American literature presents experience from an African American point of view. And in the early republic, African American literature represented a way for free Blacks to negotiate their identity in an individualized republic. And they often tried to exercise their political and social autonomy in the face of resistance from the white public, quote unquote. And again, these are from sources that I've researched, sources that I've gathered after doing tons and tons of research about this subject, because again, there's so much African American literature, there's so much American literature that we can all learn about and that we can all read about and watch movies about. There are so many books out there that have been made into adaptations, um, and there are so many books. There's so many short stories, plays, fiction books, nonfiction books. I mean, there's so much material for us to read in order to learn about authors and their creativity. And I think that oftentimes we are so busy, we don't really find the time to really dive deeply into that and learn about that for ourselves, unless we absolutely have to. And thus, an early theme of African American literature was, like other American writings, what it meant to be a citizen in post revolutionary America. So, again, we have to think about African American literature from a broad standpoint. We have to think about what the African American culture is and what that means. And we have to look at the history. You know, oftentimes people say history repeats itself, and that is so true. But when we talk about the African American community and when we talk about African American literature, we have to think about the experiences that have been expressed by many historical Black figures. Again, we think about Alice Walker with The Color Purple. We think about prolific authors like Toni Morrison. We think about Langston Hughes. We think about all of the authors. I think I just gave the answer to my trivia question, but this is very important. But we have to think about the way we write our stories. And again, as I stated earlier in the broadcast, a lot of people have questions. They've asked me questions and they've messaged me about what it meant to write your story. A lot of people have asked me, Nelson, well, how do I write a book? Or how do I jot down ideas for this new project? Or how do I think about which genre I should create? And again, I don't have an answer to any of that. I mean, people ask me all the time, why, what kind of book should I write? Or what kind of ideas should I jot down? And I don't know. And I really don't have a concrete answer for anybody. I think that it comes from here. It comes from the heart. I think that in order to be as transparent and as open and honest as possible, I think that when you write a story, I think that it needs to be authentic. I think that your experience and everything that you've been through should be written about in an eloquent way, in an eloquent way, in a way that can convey what you're trying to, the message that you're trying to bring, the message that you're trying to convey. I think that should be written and expressed in a healthy fashion. I think that, your experience is everything. So if people write about their experience, if they're not afraid to be vulnerable, and if they're not afraid to be open and honest about their life, their upbringing, even if it's filled with trauma, even if it's filled with instability, even if it's filled with dysfunction and chaos, I think that if you want to reach people and if you want to use your story in order to make an impact in another person's life, if you want to write about your experience, and if you're not afraid to, again, be vulnerable and stand in the face of opposition, or oppression. I think that it's worth you talking about. I think that everybody has a story, no matter how old or young you are, no matter which color you are, which community you identify with, which race you identify with. All of that doesn't matter. Everybody has a story. Everybody, everybody's story is different. Everyone can speak about their experiences differently, but we all have a story. So I think that when we think about things to write about, when we think about stories that we want to tell, we have to think about our experience, because I feel like our experience is everything. And oftentimes people have been taught directly and indirectly not to speak about their experience, because a lot of people who have suffered from trauma, or who have grown up in dysfunction, or who have grown up in chaos, or people who have grown up with instability. A lot of people have been taught not to speak about that, because that's something that is considered to be taboo, or that's considered to be something that, um, again, stands, when people don't stand in the face of opposition and oppression, it can be something that people have a tendency to shy away from. But I encourage everybody to talk about their experience and not be fearful of the pushback or the backlash that they get from people who don't approve of their stories. Because whenever you tell a story, no matter how traumatic it may be, no matter how how tumultuous that experience was for anybody growing up. I think that it needs to be told, because every time we write a story, every time we make attempts to convey a message in order to reach people, we're helping someone. If you can write a book and inspire at least one person, at least one reader, every a man, woman, child, young, old, middle aged, it doesn't matter. I think that when you are in the position to change the mind and the heart of one of your readers, I think that at least one reader, I think that that is a signal that you've done your job as an author. And some of our stories don't have to be labeled as nonfiction. So the stories that we tell don't always have to be spoken for in the form of a memoir. Sometimes people use fiction as the genre in order to convey the message that they want to convey, and in order to tell their story. I think that a lot of people wonder where creative people get their inspiration. And the answer to that is that it's all around you. I think that when we all talk about our stories, I think it's important for us to understand that, again, you know, if we're willing to be vulnerable, if we're willing to stand in the face of opposition because of the stories that we tell, and if we're willing to speak about things that are going to make us and everybody else uncomfortable, that means that we are doing our jobs as authors. If we can speak about that in a healthy fashion, and if we can be eloquent and speak about it in a classy and professional manner, that means that we've done our jobs as authors. Because again, the experience is not always rainbows and sunshine. The experience is not always Guns N' Roses. But again, we've been given that experience. God, from a spiritual standpoint, God has given us a gift. All of the people who aspire to be writers, or who want to use that creative muscle and to their advantage in order to write a story, your experience, God has given you an experience to talk about. There's something that He's placed in your heart to minister about. And I think that that is what all of the readers deserve. I think that your story can help someone. Your story can make another person develop a healthier self-image. That's all. I talk about that all the time. This is my purpose of creating my book series and my radio show. Helping young boys and helping young men create a better self-image, a more positive and uplifting self-image, using my personal struggles with my insecurities in order to do that. Everybody, again, should stick to that objective when they write their story. I think that as an author, you have to stand on purpose. And as an author, again, you have to be open to feedback, no matter what that looks like or how it comes across. You have to be open to feedback, constructive criticism from your editors and from people who you're working with. So on that note, I'm going to have him jump right in. And I want to introduce Mr. James Hill to the show. And again, Mr. Hill, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on the Beauty in Us radio right here on Awesome Guide Radio, to hop into the conversation. So I gave the listeners a little bit of information about you. So you are the CEO and founder of RockHill Publishing LLC, which is based out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Um, so when I had a conversation with the listeners about what it meant to be a book publisher and what it meant to be a self-published author, but also I wanted to have you on because I wanted the listeners to have the chance to listen to this from a publisher standpoint. So I know that you've been in the book publishing industry for almost 10 years now, and I know that I mean, that's the part of what you do for a living. You look at you read manuscripts all day, and you speak to people. You speak to a lot of other people who work in that same, network. Whether it's a publisher, whether it's an editor, whether it's an up and coming author. So could you tell the listeners? Could you educate us about what it means to be a book publisher? What it means to start a book publishing business, a book publishing company? What it means to just navigate through this field, because again, a lot of people have questions about this process, and a lot of people don't know how to release their first book or how to get their feet wet when it comes to telling their stories and as it pertains to just making their mark. So could you tell us a little bit about that, and a little bit about what led you to starting this company, and what led you to doing what you do every day, which is, whether it's reading manuscripts, whether it's writing your own books, you have the ability to not only make your mark in the book publishing industry, but you are in the position to represent other authors and give them a pathway to success by showcasing the work that they do.
Yes, and let me start off by saying thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And as to starting my own company, part of my company logo is the dragon. And that's because there are dragons in just about every culture. And the dragon in a lot of cultures is actually a good thing because they protect the culture. They're in the Far East, the dragons are a symbol of wealth and prosperity. And in other cultures, they're symbols of protection. So as a company, I wanted to not only produce my own work, and once I learned how to do it and learn not all the ins and outs, because you learn as you go on, as you grow. But once I learned the basics, let's say, of publishing, and I've been in computer programming for decades. So I knew about word processing and different programs on that end, the technical end of it. So once I learned these things and I realized, okay, I can publish my own work, that's fine. But I also wanted to give other people a chance to get into this business, get into the public. Because like you, when people hear you wrote a book, they all want to know, how'd you do it? How'd you get published? Where did you start? And I would be out signing books or be out at different conventions and different things. And the number one question was, how do you do this? And so I figured now I could tell people how to do it, and I do. And I could also help people do it, and I do that too. And so that's where my publishing company, RockHill, came from. And it's the idea that people have a story. Now, I don't know what your story is until I actually read it. I don't know anything about the people I publish. I have a website. People submit their work through the website. I read the manuscript. I read it usually goes in stages. Let me back up a little bit. It usually goes in stages. You don't send a publisher your entire manuscript. Those days are gone. Publisher don't have time to read, 300 pages just to figure out whether they like it or not. So it's usually you're going to send them a synopsis, a character breakdown, and then a couple of chapters out of your book, depending upon the publisher. They have their guidelines. You must follow the publisher guidelines. They're not always the same for every publisher. So if some publisher says send me the synopsis, because they usually always ask for a synopsis. They want to know what the story's about. Number one, they want to know the characters, that's going to be in it, and usually it's the main character. Don't send a character list of 500 people because you mentioned some guy one time in your book, and we don't need to know that. We don't need to know every single person mentioned. It. We need to know the major characters, maybe the secondary character, that kind of thing. And then they'll ask you, some people will ask you for the first 3 paragraphs. Some people ask you for the beginning and the end of the book. I asked for the first two chapters, not paragraphs, chapters, a middle chapter, and the end, because I have to know how your story ends. And I leave it up to you to send your best chapter. That's why I say the first 2, because I want to see how strong you are and how your story is going to progress. And then since you get one other chapter in that book to send me, I'm assuming you're going to send me the best chapter in your book, and then I want to know how the story ends, because I got to know, what happens in the story. I got the synopsis. I want to see how strong an ending you got, because those are the two major points of a story. How does it begin? Is it going to bring me in? Is it going to pull me into your story? Am I going to want to hear about the characters? Am I going to want to learn their life? And it doesn't matter what type of story you're writing either. Let me put it to you that way. It doesn't really matter. Every story is about characters. Okay? It's either the event that happened to the characters or how the character influenced their world. But when you look at a story, it's always about the characters. You can't have a story without people of some sort. I don't care what the people are either. They could be lizard men. That's fine. But they better be lizard men who have some kind of character. So you want to know how the people are pulled into the story. How do you get your readers in? And then you want to know if you leave them satisfied at the end. It doesn't have to be a good ending. It doesn't have to be a happy ending, unless it's a romance. Romances always end happy. Okay, so people tell me that they wrote a romance and everything, and they send me the story, and I say, you wrote a love story. It's a big difference between writing a love story and writing a romance. A romance ends happy. Love stories, not so much. So there's a difference between writing love stories and writing romances. Just like there's a difference between writing horror and writing thrillers, and mysteries as well as thrillers. Or there's all kinds of different things, and sometimes it's hard for the writer, especially new writers, to figure out where they fit. And that's the job of the publisher too. When you send me a story and you told me I got this great mystery, and in the first chapter you already told me who the bad guy was and what they did, it's no longer a mystery. It might be a thriller, it might be a thrilling story to follow this guy through the story and everything, and what he does and how he get caught in the end. But it's not a mystery, because you already told me who the bad guy was and what the mystery about him is. So, it comes down to, and that's the thing about what I do. I like to help new writers. So that's where we specialize in. We specialize in new writers. It's also a very difficult world when you specialize in new writers. But we all been there. At one point or another, everybody who ever wrote a book was a new writer. And so if you wrote more than one, you became a new writer, then you became an experienced writer. And as you go on, you learn more experiences, and you learn more and more about this job, this business, this life we call writers, authors. So that's why, and that's how I started my company. And I will just say there's three things you really need as a writer. Now, you were touching on this when you were speaking about being a self-published author. There's several types of publishing. You can be self-published, in which case you wear all the hats. Now, by that, I don't mean you have to do everything yourself, and you should not do everything yourself. You know, you shouldn't be the book cover artist. You shouldn't be the formatter. You definitely should not be the editor. Okay. If you do nothing else and have no other money, invest in a good editor. Find yourself a good editor, not your mom and not the guy who got A's in English. Find somebody who actually knows about editing books, because it's a very big difference between that. There's content editors, there's grammatical editors. As you can see, that's even hard to say. But there's all types of editors that you need. So you got to invest in a good editor. You can do the artwork. You can go on Photoshop and piece together your book cover, and it will look fine. So you can do that. I've done a lot of artwork myself. But let's slide that way. That shit behind me is called the Emerald Lady. That's the artwork I did for my book. So, of course, I have computer skills, so I'm able to do Photoshop and stuff. People say, "My God, Photoshop is so hard to work at," and it is, and it takes me days and maybe weeks to put together a book cover in Photoshop, which is why I got a graphic designer to start working on my covers, because, like I said, you don't want to wear all the hats. So you move from self-publishing. We're going to jump right over Vanity Publishing, because Vanity Publishing is, they will take whatever you send them and publish it. They're not going to edit it. They're not going to they might put together a book cover for you, but that's about it. And with Vanity Publishing, you're their customer. They're not looking to publish they'll get your book out into the open, out into the wide world, right? But they're really not looking to promote your book or anything. You're their customer. They want you to buy your book and take it and go stand on the street corner and say, "Hey, I wrote a book, come buy it." That's what Vanity Publishing is. And it's called Vanity Publishing because it's for your vanity. And now, it's not really a bad thing, but like if you're writing a memoir or your life story, your autobiography, and you're only going to write this one book, and maybe you're writing it for your family, maybe you want to write your family history or something like that, and you're not really writing it to sell it, then Vanity Publishing is fine. And that goes way back to, like, I don't know, 70s, 60s, whatever. God knows when Vanity Publishing came in. But it has been around a long time, and that's the purpose it really serves. Is if you have your story you want to tell, and you're not really looking to sell it in the world, then Vanity Publishing is great. And some people go that route, and it's not really anything wrong with it, but just realize you're still doing everything that you would be doing if you were self-publishing. So you don't really need vanity publishers. I actually did Vanity Publishing at the beginning, and then, because I wanted to learn the publishing business. I wanted to know what they knew about publishing. And then once I learned that, out the door they went, and I launched my own publishing company. So there's also that idea, you learn from somebody who's done it. So then
Yes.
you move on, and there's the next step up would be small houses, small presses, which do everything like the big house. We pay the royalty, we do the book cover, we have the editor, we do everything that everybody else does in the business, but we only do it on a smaller number of bases. I started my publishing company with the idea I was going to publish 2 books a year, and no more than that, because it takes a lot of time and effort to publish a book. And 2 books a year, I figured, okay, I'll be good at that. Along came COVID, and we went into lockdown, and I was a good thing because my editor got trapped here with me. She was in South Africa, and she comes back and forth every couple of months or so. And she came back and she came here, and she got trapped. She couldn't go home. And so since we were both here together and the time difference was gone and all that kind of stuff, I managed to get 5 books out. So we was able to hit the ground running and really keep on it. And we managed to put out 5 of my authors that we had waiting in the wings. Whereas we would have probably got 1 or 2 of them out at a time, because we was able to bounce things off each other on a timely basis. It's a 7-8 hour difference between here and South Africa. So you could imagine I'm asleep when she's awake and she's asleep when I'm awake. So we only get a couple of hours out of the day that we can work together and do things. So
yes, and that was a lot of knowledge that you just brought to the table, because and it's important that I'm glad that you talked about the different forms, the different publishing routes that people can take in order to showcase the work that they do, and the pros and cons to everything. I think that's really important for people to know, because oftentimes people just want to jump right in, and they want to go from A to Z without really learning about what it takes, because because writing a book is not an easy thing to do. Taking time out to make sure that it your book is not only not only good to sell, but it's also important for people to know that you have to, again, like you just stated, tell a story that people really want to read about. Of course, your family members and friends, of course, that's an audience that's always going to support whatever you do. But if you're trying to reach an audience beyond beyond the scope of people that you really know, you really have to buckle down and figure out what you want to write about, because every writer has its strengths and weaknesses, and that's why we have editors. And just like you talked about, you can't be the book publisher, the editor, you can't do the book cover, you can't do everything. You have to, as an author, let go of the handlebars of control as it pertains to thinking that you can be everything and do everything in order to sell your book and to sell your story. I learned that in the very beginning. When you take constructive criticism from your editor and from your book publisher, you take it with a grain of salt and you take it with charm, because it's going to help you get to the next level in the long run, so it doesn't come back to haunt you. Because by the time you get to book number 5, you can definitely look back at book number 1 and say, listen, I can definitely see my growth here. I can see where I was a little green to this in the beginning, but I can see where I've grown. I can see my maturity in this. So what kind of my next couple of questions pertain to like your company. So what kind of authors do you represent, and what does Black literature mean to you? Because Black literature is what I spoke about in the first half of the show. But what does your company, what kind of authors do you represent, and what kind of authors do you look for? Because I know that, just like you said, you started out saying that you wanted to only publish 2 books a year, but the pandemic has actually helped you accomplish more than what you originally wanted. So could you tell us a little bit about what kind of authors you represent? Because I know that book publishers, there are some book publishers who want specific type of writers. They want to read manuscripts with certain genres. I know that there are literary agents. I've met literary agents at writers' conferences who are looking to represent people who produce a specific genre of books. And every person is different. Every literary agent is different. Every book publisher is different. So you might get one who's really, really difficult to impress, and you might have a book publisher or literary agent that may sign you right on the spot when they read the first few pages. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Like who you represent? Who are you looking for to represent your publishing company as an author?
okay, basically I publish four genres. I publish adult fiction, and by adult fiction I mean I really don't go into young adults and things like that. Although I have 1 or 2 books that are in more toward the young adult, it's mostly people who are 18 and up type of fiction. So adult fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, and romance. And like you said, you publish the things that you know about and that you are interested in. And I don't want people to think that because they didn't get picked up by a publisher, it meant their work wasn't good. No, it might mean that you just queried the wrong publisher. You don't query a publisher who publishes sci-fi with a romance. That they're not interested in that, so they're not going to publish it. I don't care how good your romance is. You send it to a sci-fi guy, and he's going to say this is romance and throw it to the side. So I picked those four genres because I write sci-fi, I write fantasy, I write adult fiction, and my editor was a romance writer. She's now doing some fantasy work because she also wanted to be a fantasy writer. But she wrote four romance novels, and that's how I found her because I was talking to her and everything. I read her romance novel and said, "Man, she writes really well. She's really good." And so I picked her up as being my editor because she said she liked to edit, and that's the thing. You want to find the editor who really likes and enjoys the editing because that's hard. That's hard work because you have to put yourself to the back and work on what the author wants to say, not how you would say it. You know, when you read a book, you sometimes look at a book and say, "Man, I wouldn't have done it that way." Okay, fine, but it's not your book, so you have to do it the way the author wants in most cases. Now you may tell the author that you have to massage this, and that's what content editors are. And that's where I come in a little bit heavier because I look at the book and I look at the content, and I'll tell people this part of your story doesn't belong in your story because it really doesn't have anything to do with your story. It's a nice sidebar, and maybe you should put it in another story, come back to that some other time, but it really just taking up space in this story. You need to get that out. You took a side turn here, and you're way off somewhere and you never went back to it, so therefore why is it there? That's content editing. Also, we find that some people don't know where their story actually begins, and this is a problem with a lot of new writers and maybe a lot of old writers too, because sometimes when you start writing a story, you start and you're going and you're going, and you're 3 chapters in before you actually get to what your actually story's about. So the first 3 chapters are all background and all kinds of other information and other characters that doesn't really tell the story. It doesn't really help the story. Or maybe they'll help the story later, but I don't know what the maid, job and her mother did and what his father does and all this kind of stuff at the beginning of the story. Because the story isn't about them. It's about this other person. So, we can slide them to the middle or toward the back and get to the story. So that's one aspect of the publishing business that the publisher really actually works with the author and helps them. It helps them structure their story. That's what a content editor does. Helps you structure your story, helps you tell your story in a cohesive manner. Because some people, it stream of consciousness is great, but it goes all over the place like a bee flying to the flower. That bee flies all over the place before he goes to that flower, and all the other bees follow him because that's the way they learn to go. But if you want your reader to follow you, make a beeline straight to the flower. Don't make that other beeline that goes all over the place. To try to stay, in the lane and moving forward in the story. I mean, you have subplots and you have side tracks and things like that because you want to make the story interesting. But you can't make them with so many sidetracks and so many subplots that people can't tell what the story's about. You lose your readers by having too many stories to tell. So
Yes,
tell one
absolutely.
story.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really important to know. So what kind of projects, my last couple of questions before we wrap up the interview was that what kind of projects are you currently working on, and what advice would you give to people who want to become writers and who want to learn more about what it means to build a book publishing company like yours? Like, you're almost 10 years in, to your book publishing company, and you've been able to see all of the fruits of your labor in terms of how many authors that you've represented and you've signed. And I just looked up this. It just came to my mind. Dr. Seuss was rejected by 27 publishers before he was able to publish his first book. And I think a lot of people don't know that because of how successful he turned out. So, what kind of advice would you give to people who want to become an author, who want to start a book publishing company, and what kind of projects are you looking towards right now? In a nutshell.
Okay, well, first thing, if you want to be an author, have tough skin. You are going to be rejected multiple times. So, just get ready for the rejections, and it depends upon who you send your work out to. You might just get a form letter that said, well, this is great, but we don't want it. Or, if you're lucky and you get that personalized one that tells you why they don't want it, or, what they thought was good about your story, even though they don't want it. That's great. I love those. This is great. It's this and that, but it's so dark. It's just a dark story. Now, I've been working on the Killer series, and I'll flash the books up here real quick. That was the first one. Then that's Killer with a Heart. Then we have Killer with 3 Heads. And then we have Killer with Black Blood. And got to go that way. Killer with Black Blood. And that is my Killer series. And the reason why I'm flashing that on the screen, because I just finished the 4th book this year. So that's coming out this year. It's a final in the series. I like to do series. Series are really good because it gives people something to get to know the author. So if you're a one-time author, that's fine. I also wrote Pegasus, which is a one-off type of story, although I have a prequel and things like that. That doesn't really make it a series, but it tells you within the same vein. That's a sci-fi. The other ones were adult fiction, crime stories. But if you have more than one story and you can do series, and that's kind of hard, because I would say if you're going to write a series, plan the whole series out before don't write them helter-skelter, because you'll wind up losing the storyline. So kind of like plan out your series. And people like to read stories, and they like to get in contact and know the author. So they don't want to read an author that only wrote one book and one story, and that's that. Especially with the price of books these days. I don't want to read an author who I know have nothing else to offer. So, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a series. But when you write that first book and you finished it, start writing the second book. Don't wait to sell your first book before you write the second, because it's going to be a while before you sell that first book. So just start writing your second. Assume that you are going to sell the first book. Assume that you're going to find a publisher, and assume that everything's going to turn out great and you're going to be a millionaire someday in life, and begin working on your second book now. So that's my advice to anybody who wants to be an author. It's like anything else. You don't just do one thing. Guy who builds a house that doesn't build one house and then walks away and never builds another. Same thing with author. If you're going to make this your work, but be prepared to do more than one.
Yes, absolutely. So, how can people get in touch with you if they are interested in, um, you know, you know, being represented by you as their publisher, as a new and up and coming author? And how can people contact you if they want to learn more about the type of work, the type of you work in terms of like what you represent, the kind of work that you represent, and the kind of authors that you represent? How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about that, or if they want to be represented by you as their publisher?
The best way is just to go to RockHillPublishing.com. That's my publishing website. You can find information about all my authors there. You can find out information about us. Right now, our submission page is closed, but you can send me an email through there, and there's an About Us page. You can contact the author, or contact the publisher, contact the editor, and send me an email. And when we open up submissions again, we'll let you know. So it's pretty easy. Just go to the website and RockHillPublishing.com. That's the best way to get in contact with me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Hill, for taking time out of your schedule to be with us this evening. I'm going to let you go, but I wanted to thank you for dropping a lot of knowledge here tonight. You dropped out a lot of knowledge, a lot of great food for thought for all of the listeners, and including me. So I appreciate you for doing that.
I thank you for having me. I
Yes,
appreciate you very much.
yes, you're welcome. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
So that wraps up another edition of the Beauty in Us Radio right here on Awesome God Radio. I want to thank you all for tuning in this evening. So this was the last show again for Black History Month in 2022. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. It's been great these past few weeks just sitting and listening to a lot of inspirational people with their stories. So next week on March 1st, Tuesday, March 1st, 2022, from 6 to 7 p.m., we are going to have, we're going to kick off our Women's History Month special with Miss Lisa P. Ellis. She's an attorney at law. So she owns a private practice, the law office of Lisa P. Ellis, and she's going to talk to us about the work that she does as an attorney for the state of Maryland. So I've spoken with her, and she's awesome. She can give us a lot of great food for thought in terms of what it means to become an attorney and what it means to start a private practice and what it means to invest your time, your education, and your money, and just your everything into learning about the law and becoming a lawyer. Again, I appreciate you all for tuning in. I hope you all have had a great Black History Month. I hope you all have enjoyed learning about your history, because Black history is American history, and it's something that we should all cherish. And as we kick off Women's History Month next week, I want to encourage you all to again tune in. So make an appointment to meet me back here at 6 p.m. Um, next week on Tuesday, March 1st, 2022, so that we can welcome Miss Lisa P. Ellis to the show, and so we can talk about what how to become an attorney, what it means to study law, and what it means to be in private practice as an attorney for not just for the state of Maryland, but for your community, for your country, for the people you represent, for the communities that you're representing. So thanks again, and I will see you all next week. Oh, and by the way, Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou were my answer to my trivia question. I kind of revealed it um, at the beginning of the show, but I wanted to make it easy for you guys. So again, I appreciate you for tuning in. I thank you for your comments and your support and everything. So take care, and I will see you all next week.